with you. What was it like? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The man of the hour. The one who's making his feature directorial debut here. What was it like when you started this process in putting this film together, and why?
I started this process because I wanted to find a way to communicate with my sons, my two sons, a little bit about how different my life is from their life, the world that their father came from, and the world that they live in now. And it started because they were asking questions, and very often I was like, I'll tell you when you're older. I'll tell you when you're older. My oldest is going off to college next year, so he's older. So that began a kind of writing process. And so I would wake up in the morning and I would start writing from memory, and then I would go to the studio and listen. I have an app on my phone that allows me to listen to what I wrote, and I would listen to it while I was painting. And then at the end of the week, my producer, Derek St. France, would go, there you are, would go through my pages with me and say stuff like, "You don't seem like you're saying everything." And so it was, in some ways, it was very much like a kind of therapy, because he refused to let me, like, I don't know, not be honest, you know. And what I try to explain to people is this is not a direct autobiography. There are things that are different, but the truth of my story is in every line. So,
and it was brilliantly done. Brilliantly done.
Thank you.
And talk about the time, and on the show actually this morning on Good Morning America, we were talking about how over the past 2 decades, the thought of suicide has increased by 60%.
Pardon me.
No, but this morning we were talking about it on the show, how the thought of suicide has increased for young boys of color, black boys mainly, over the past 2 decades by 60%. Andre, you did extremely well, but I am most certain that you brought up some emotions from people in this room. You may not even be able to talk about it now, but so many black boys share your story. What was it like to sort of dig into whatever you had to dig into to bring that character to life?
Well, thank you for that, first of all. I appreciate it. And thank y'all for being here on this hot day. Thank y'all for making the journey. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there are times, I think, when, like, the material and, like, the artist meet at the perfect moment, you know? And I think that at the time this came along, I was also processing some things about my own father. You know, I had a wonderful father, but he was dealing with some health challenges at the time, and I was trying to make sense of that myself. And so, you know, the script gave me an opportunity to go deeper into myself and into that relationship with my own dad. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we had a number of conversations, the three of us did, about our fathers. Thinking specifically about one night on set when we were shooting one particular scene, and you know, all had to kind of take a break and step away. And it led to a really beautiful conversation between the three of us about our fathers. I mean, these two gentlemen are fathers. I'm not yet, but I learned a lot from them around that. And I think he just opened up a space for healing among the three of us. And I hope that the film can do the same for other people, you know, who are processing, metabolizing, challenging things.
What did you learn about forgiveness? That's a good question.
Well, I don't know that I necessarily maybe learned something, but I think I was reminded, perhaps, that that it's a choice, first of all. Also, how that it's often for the forgiver, you know? Yeah, things like that. I think those are the two things that come to mind for me.
And John, you really brought your character to life. I mean, I was mad at you at some point. What was it like even bringing your character to life? I mean, did you have to dig in and go somewhere deep? And did you share that experience or know someone who lived that life? Especially with addiction.
Well, it's funny, man. I came up during the crack epidemic, you know? And almost every other person I knew was hooked on that drug. It didn't make all of those people bad people. but they couldn't figure out how to get from underneath that addiction. But I watched so many people still continue to try to be fathers, you know what I mean, be good people, and still feed that monster. And I said, if I can just figure out how to incorporate all of that, I think I come close to who LaRon is. Because LaRon was feeding the monster, but he loved his family. So, yeah.
You did it well, my brother. Good to see you. I mean, everything that you touch is absolutely amazing. I think we can all say that.
That's their touch. So I was blessed enough to be a part of this. Yeah.
I love how she's being humble tonight. You know, your role, when I was watching your role, I saw how Black women have had to be strong, even when they needed assistance. But they still had to be the strong ones in households, especially when our fathers were so broken. Was there a place that you had to go, or did you know anything about that life?
Being a strong Black woman? Yeah, I think that's true about it, for sure. No, it's a good question. I mean, yeah, you know, there's something about it that is inherent, you know. Yes, I do know what it's like to be a strong Black woman. I know what it's like to support family and to support people and to support men that we love, you know, that are struggling. And I know what it's like to not be seen in any part of that struggle sometimes, you know what I mean? So I think that it was very refreshing to play this character, because I think what we really decided is that Aisha and Terrell really come from similar familial backgrounds. And so it was nice to be married to somebody that we have established that we didn't want to repeat some of these generational things in our household. You know, I think they both made a practice of just a healthy marriage and a healthy family, and that was very important to both of them. So yeah, I'm familiar with some of those experiences, but I'm also familiar with what it is we established in the film, which is that we didn't want to repeat some of these things. And so, I don't know, there were a lot of ways that I felt like Aisha was very healthy for me. I was like, I need to get into her. So yeah, we're familiar with that, but you know, I mean, as Black women, that is what we do.
Let's talk about your song as well.
Oh, thanks.
So was it like writing that song, putting that song together, putting it to life?
I have a terrible memory. Does anybody have ginkgo biloba?
She wrote that song while we were on set. We would shoot in the day, and then she would go to the studio at night.
Yes.
And she finished that song.
Titus came to the studio a few times though, and after a while he was like, 3 a.m. Okay. I got my ADHD. ADHD has to take its course first, and then the lyrics will come out. No, I think. Yes, writing that song. First of all, it came through a lot of conversations with Titus and with the rest of the cast, just, you know, about what this meant to them and what this was, and ultimately his vision and what he was trying to get across. Like you said, it's not completely autobiographical, but it's personal to him. And I think it's one thing to be excited about an adaptation of a book or, you know, just a new idea, but this is really personal to him, and you can tell that there's, if executed properly, there's a lot of healing to be had from this movie. So Bricks is the name of the song, and it really is examining, to me, it is a miracle that people are able to create realities and create futures that they never witnessed or experienced as kids. You know, it's amazing that you can create a healthy marriage or a healthy family or healthy love or healthy self-love or a healthy spiritual relationship when you never experienced any of these things. The fact that when I think about my parents, same thing, growing up in the crack epidemic, neither of them were hooked on crack. And the fact that the rest of their family and fathers and mothers had been hooked, the fact that you can avoid those things or create a future you've never seen is a miracle. And that's what Bricks is about. It is a hard-fought, you know, victory, but it is brick by brick. And so that's kind of what we're examining together. I feel like we wrote the song together. So that's what we're examining. Here you go. Here you go.
You know, it also points to the fact that sometimes you can look good and look like you're not going through something.
Okay, don't
But
come for me right now.
the entire panel. I love me some Andra. So this is for the entire panel. And we'll actually send it to you, Terrell. Sometimes you can look good and look like everything is together. And I'll say it like some people say in the black church, you see my glory, but you don't know my story. A lot of us are suffering silently. What's your advice to people in this room and people who will see this movie? Terrell. And then we'll come back to you. I'm calling you Terrell. I'm calling you Terrell.
Oh boy.
Mr. André Holland.
Man, you can see all the toughness tonight. My advice to people who are, well, I'll say this. I think people who don't look like what they've been through is what you said. You asked about forgiveness earlier, and I had a thought after you went away from me. I thought, well, the other thing maybe that I've learned or taken away from it is to do with self-forgiveness. I think that for me is something that maybe I have overlooked or sometimes struggle with, and I think that is a kind of violence maybe against oneself that also needs to be contended with. So I think maybe my advice would be to people who are struggling in silence to try to find a place of forgiveness for that struggle that you're having, right? And then, talk to people, find community. I mean, this has been like a communal healing experience for me. So, when I say that the artist and the material meet, I got as much out of this experience as I feel like I gave to it. So that's what I would say. But I wonder what Mr. Trotter got to say about that.
I know people also say that forgiveness is more about you. It should be more about you than the person because you're the one that has to live with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's relative, right, to the relationship. But, why this film was, it is so important to me is because I'm able to see so many different, pieces of myself and my family in Titus's story. Well, in the story that's being told, even though it's not, exactly autobiographical. My mother, struggled with drug addiction during the, crack epidemic, and it was crazy. And, it's wild. I see both, I see my mother and my father, in this film. Well, at least I see the mother and father role, but because, I lost my father at such a young age that I didn't really have, any memories. Like, my memories of my dad are only through, I created them, through photographs and, newspaper clippings and stuff like that. But yeah, in this film, I was able to see, sort of both sides of my mother. You know what I mean? In that, she was the maternal figure, but, she was also, struggling. You know what I mean? So yeah, she needed, forgiveness, but she was also very forgiving.
So Titus, what is your hope for this film? What do you want people to walk away with this fall?
So, okay, so there was the scene that Andra was talking about was a scene that was upstairs in the office. Y'all remember that? LaRon comes in and they have this interaction. That scene didn't happen in the gallery. That scene actually happened in my studio. I experienced that. I ended that situation and I sat down and I wrote down the situation almost word for word because it was so disturbing to me. But I didn't give myself an opportunity to cry about it because we ain't got time to cry. We got work. There are things to do. I didn't have compassion for myself. But when I watched that same thing play out with him going through it, it broke me. What he's talking about is, and thank you for being kind and not throwing it out there, but I cried for half an hour and I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop. I had to leave. I had to leave the set because I just could not stop. Because even though I couldn't find that compassion, that sympathy for myself, seeing it outside of myself made me go, whoa, there's something really wrong with this. So I hope that people begin to have that kind of compassion for themselves, see themselves reflected on the screen in this way, and say, I can see myself there. Yep. And even though that voice in my head says, boy, we ain't got time for this, you gotta get back to work. What are you doing? That you can hear past that voice. That's the first thing. The other thing is that I hope that this film gives folks the idea that there are other kinds of forgiveness. What was defined as forgiveness for me growing up in the church and all of that stuff, I had to reconfigure that a little bit to make sense. I had to deal with that in a way that actually allowed me to be able to raise my children outside of a cycle, this continued situation. And so as Terrell says, you know, I forgive you, but you took the past, I'm not giving you the future. And so for some folks, that doesn't sound like forgiveness.
But it is.
For some folks, that's not gonna be okay. You're not gonna feel comfortable with that. But if you've been through something, that might be the only way that you can extend forgiveness. So I'm hoping, I did grow up in a church. I'm hoping that that's what people take away.
And I want to call you LaRon so bad. So bad. You know, when I was watching your character, especially when we were dealing with the young Terrell, the younger Terrell, it broke my heart because I think so many of us, and when I say us, black men, when we were boys, we were pushed so hard by our fathers, and we weren't allowed to cry. We weren't allowed to share our feelings. And because of that, so many of us are now locked up or dead, or abusing our kids, or our significant others, our partners, whatever. What advice do you have for turning that around, especially for us?
Well, I feel that now is the time for us to get closer to our sons. I think it's time for us to have real conversations about what it really was before. That's that generational healing, because as you know, what LaRon was passing down was what was passed down to him. And he felt it was no problem, you know, he had no problem with it because that's how he grew up. Although it hurt him a lot and it really destroyed him in a way. It led him to drugs. And I feel that now we got to be more open and honest about what it is so that we can learn how to heal. And I feel that the best way to do that is just not sugarcoat it for them, man. I don't sugarcoat it for my sons. I tell them the truth, man. Everything. I just told them, you know, that this is what it is. Because either you're going to find out now or you're going to find out later. And later they may come back and say, well, why you didn't tell me this? You know? So I'm going to tell you now. So I feel that that's what we need to do, is have open dialogue and conversations. And what I mean by our sons is that it doesn't necessarily have to be your kid.
Right.
It can be anybody's kid that's looking for help and looking for advice to be a better person.
And then a final question for Andrew before we open it up to the floor. When Mom was in the hospital, clearly, Terrell, if I can call him Terrell again, broke down. You were saying you were sorry, kissed on her forehead, all of that stuff. Why is it important to say you know, to ask for forgiveness or to, offer forgiveness in this moment, to say I'm sorry or to ask for it and not wait until it's too late?
That's a good question. Feels like kind of two parts. So I think that like Dave said, so I think that part of it is that forgiveness frees, like they said, the forgiver, in my opinion. And I think that I think usually when you're asking for forgiveness, it's because some sort of shift or pivot needs to happen. And it's like anything. It's like when you go to, if you're an addict and you go to meet, the first thing you have to do is actually admit that you have an issue, admit that you have a problem. And forgiveness, asking for forgiveness or seeking forgiveness sort of is the statement that says, hey, I'm asking for forgiveness because I know that I've done something here that requires forgiveness. And so in order for you to actually make a change and have a positive impact in your life and the people that you encounter, you first have to actually admit that there's something, there's an issue there. So I think that oftentimes that's why when they say that forgiveness is just as much for the forgiver as it is for the person who needs forgiveness, is because, again, healing cannot happen, transformation cannot happen, and we're oftentimes blocking whatever thing in the future that we could have, or that we could rebuild, or even as Titus said, if it's a matter of, hey, I forgive you, but we need to separate. Either way, I don't believe healing can happen and transformation can happen until those things are dealt with. So, you know, obviously we don't always have the luxury of doing it before it's quote unquote too late, but I also don't necessarily think it's ever too late, truly, if I'm looking at it from a spiritual lens, which I often do. So yes, that's right.
All right, let's take some questions from the audience.